you can't just tell people to hand over the land. It's their decision when they're good and ready to hand it over. And when it's handed over, you can't take it back. So whoever you give it to, you have to be happy in your own head that whatever they do with it, you're happy with those facts.
Hello, I'm Ciaran Lynch and welcome to Ovicast, the Teagasc podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this week's episode, Teagasc Farm Management Specialist James McDonnell and Succession Ireland mediator Clare O'Keeffe joins myself and my colleague Catherine Egan, host of the Beef Edge, as we discuss all aspects of generation renewal, succession and mediation. We start the discussion with James explaining a little bit more about generation renewal and succession.
The term that I'm most used to using is farm succession and inheritance, but the term generation renewal has really come from the EU, that it's a problem that's across the world. And as part of the last couple of rounds of CAP, there is renewed focus on trying to reduce the age profile of farmers in general. So in Ireland, it's at 59 years of age at the moment. So if that's the average age, there's, we know that there's a very small percentage under 35. So therefore, there must be a good few that are well over to 59. So it's just a term that's used to describe the age profile of farmers. And it's seen as a problem at the age that it is at the moment. I suppose older farmers are less able to get away out of dangerous animals, so health and safety is an issue. Working on their own is an issue if the kids are away. If something happens, who's there for help? And I suppose there's so many schemes involved now. Younger people are probably better educated to follow the schemes and follow the rules and the cross compliance and all that. And if we want to make inroads on our climate change and water quality targets, it's people that are better educated will help us reach those. So that's why there's such a government and EU policy focus in this area at the moment. So it's just a term, but it covers a lot of things. Like from my work perspective, it's around, transferring the family farm. It's around registered farm partnerships. It's about keeping farmers farming or keeping the farms as family farms in rural Ireland. So it doesn't matter whether it's two neighbours coming together to work a bigger operation, like we had in the farm walk last Friday, or it's a parent and child, working together where there might be off-farm employment and, the parent can step back when the pension starts coming in and the child might have an off-farm job. So the farm is being run. It's providing a little bit of income for two families in a way to top up what's happening between the pension and what the job is bringing in and allowing people to work together. So it takes some of the lonesomeness out of it and it's good for agriculture. We've now 5,000 partnerships in Ireland. The vast majority of them are family partnerships. And that's a good thing, because it's helping keep rural Ireland alive, I suppose.
You've highlighted a lot of it, James. Like it really has that dual focus, both in getting younger people involved in industry, but also providing support for farmers nearing retirement or near an age where they need assistance on farms.
Yeah, absolutely. And, young people tend to come in with new ideas. So, there might be a new piece of equipment that a child has seen and an ag college brings it home and it helps the operation. It's having a second person there when you're herding stock, and you have jobs to do like that. There's lots of things on the farm that you can't do on your own. So, having a family member, young person involved is a good thing.
Another aspect, James, that comes into that is around land mobility and maybe giving a younger person an opportunity to get started in the industry. We talk about generation renewal, like has a big important role to play there as well.
Yeah, I suppose we're putting lots of people through courses, and I know that there's lots of farmers that go to university now even first before they go farming. So the education level in farming has improved a huge amount over the last 40 years. And in that time, the age profile of people living longer, back in 1980, the average person lived to 75. Now they're living to 85. So there's no forced transfer anymore because of the death of, there's less of that. So as a result, in some cases, it has delayed the handover of the farm. So The only other way to get the conversation going is through partnerships. So as somebody slows down and gets older and is less able to do things, it's good that we have a younger generation that's educated and willing to get going. So there are lots of incentives from a tax point of view, from an EU point of view, with extra payments and higher grant rates. There's, if you want to go and get advice, there's a grant available to cover 50% of the advice that you might get from a solicitor or an accountant or an ag advisor. So the government has seen, benefits of trying to, hold the age profile or maybe even reduce the age profile a little bit, benefits to the economy, benefits for health and safety, benefits for farm families, benefits, around rural development. So it's a good thing that there's this focus on it. And, I think I'm at this game now well over a decade now, and it was a hot topic back in 2012. That topic has only gotten hotter since.
Certainly has. And look, you mentioned there about getting that conversation going, and Clare, we're delighted to have you joining us as well. Just in that context, and it can be quite an emotive subject as well. So in terms of mediation or bringing people around the table, what is mediation really in the farming context?
Mediation it's an independent person, and it's a confidential service. We're impartial, non-judgmental, and it's the parties present. They come up with the solution. We just facilitate. We listen with respect, by and large, paraphrasing back what each person says. So they each know they've been heard and that they understand what the other person wished to say. So we're not judging, we're not the advisors, we're not giving advice, but we're allowing a safe place for all of the family to listen to each other, to find a workable solution going forward. And it's not that mediators, agricultural mediators, we're not coming in generally to address a problem. In this context, it's to facilitate a conversation, to advance it on, to reach a workable solution going forward for the family. Most people would be familiar with mediation in society at large, but we specifically work within the agricultural sector, facilitating succession and inheritance conversations.
Thanks, Clare. I think that's a really good definition of mediation. I suppose that brings us into, James, starting out. What are the essential steps for a farm family, that's starting on the succession planning?
That's a good question, Catherine. I suppose as I see it, if the first thing is that the farmer themselves, before they hand over, they need to have a will in place. That's number one, because if the unforeseen happens before they put a succession plan in place, the will carries out their wishes. And typically across the country, only 50% of people have a will. Now, in the webinar last week, we did a poll and we saw that 60% had a will. And I know we got a message from one client afterwards to say that they checked their will after the webinar and they realised that there was some items in it that they hadn't thought of that we had mentioned in the webinar. So they were going to update it. So that's the first step. The second step then is about, who's getting what, Is the farm being divided into 2 or 3, or is it being given as one block and other children getting a site or an education, or, the conversation about who's to get what. So once the conversation is done, and that's where Clare is so important, the mediator, because, all of the children might want all of the assets and there's not enough to go around. So then there could be a row. So communication is the second step, and putting a kind of a plan in place. The third step, I would say, then, is taxation is very complex in Ireland. So once everybody knows what they're going to get, well, then they need to sit down with their accountant and work out what are the tax implications for capital gains tax for the farmer. That's going to retire in the future. And then there's capital acquisitions tax and stamp duty for the recipients. And those taxes are quite punitive. So you're looking at the young person having the education to avoid stamp duty. And if transfer is delayed, what assets does the young person have? And does that rule them out of getting agricultural relief, which is an extremely important relief? And there's the capital gains tax on the parent. If they had leased the land out for a number of years, that could be at risk before transfer. So sitting down with the accountant with your valuations, and everybody has to have everything that they own valued to do the calculation correctly. So that's the next step. And then after that, then if it's all agreed and there's no tax implications, it's about going to the solicitor. But if there are tax implications, about figuring, is there a way to avoid the tax and still achieve the plan that you want to achieve? Or maybe it needs to be tweaked a little bit. Maybe some comes now and some comes on death. So while everybody is alive, plans can be adjusted. But once somebody dies, it's whatever's in the will and they're stuck with in the situation they're in. So for the vast majority, a lifetime transfer is the way to go because you can minimise the tax. For some, there might be some assets that might need to be delayed until after the date of death. But ultimately, once it's figured out who's getting what, how the assets are to be divided or passed on, well, then it's about going to the solicitor. Now, sometimes, there's the farmhouse. Is it right of residence? Is it exclusive right of residence? Can you, do upgrades to the house should you need to move a bedroom or a bathroom downstairs? How does the parents that are trying to pass on the assets secure their own future financially and how are they looked after? So that's part of the conversation. So everything that a mediator or that the family discuss themselves needs to lead into a plan. And the tax needs to be checked on that plan. And once that's figured out and passed, that's okay. Well, then it's about going to the solicitor and signing on the dotted line. And along that journey, there's education of the young people because they may need to have, if they don't have a green cert, they may need to go and get it. For some, it's about paying the stamp duty, then doing the education and claiming the money back. So they're the main steps. And I would say first will, second, it's about the conversation, third, it's about the tax, fourth, it's the solicitor in that kind of order. And sometimes there's a bit of back and forth. And what we find is that there's an awful lot of legwork involved because your solicitor, you might live in Athenry, but your solicitor could be in Roscommon Town and your accountant might be in Galway City. So there might be a couple of days getting around to them all. And then if you have 3 kids and there's one in Dublin, one in Cork and one in New York, it's complicated to try and have the conversation with time zones. So WhatsApp video and Zoom have made those conversations a little bit easier in post-COVID times, but it still takes a bit of time. So in Teagasc, what we're trying to do with our transfer and the family farm clinics, and we're on the road since 2014, is to try and bring all those professionals into the one room. So if the solicitor tells you go and ask the accountant a question, you just have to walk across the hotel room. So that's what we're doing on the 30th of September in the Lady Gregory Hotel in Gort, and we're moving on to Roscommon on the 1st of October, and we end up in Monaghan Town on the 14th of October after doing six events around the country. So we're just trying to make the journey a little bit easier for people to do their succession plan. And the fifth step, I mentioned 4, the fifth one is for everybody to update their wills once all the transfers have been done.
And there are essential steps in the approach really to start the conversation, James, and set a plan in place really from that point of view. Clare, in relation to mediation, what role do you see mediation and professional advisors play in the generation renewal, especially when it comes to family dynamics and emotions are at play?
Yes, indeed. Emotions are very real for all of us. So what we endeavour to deal with are the facts. But we have to acknowledge the emotions that's behind the facts. So listening, because the emotion will drive on the conversation. So acknowledging that it is a very emotive topic for many, and it can be happy, it can be sad, it can be the whole spectrum of emotions can be brought to the table. But addressing the facts, what are the facts in the family? Who owns what? What are the assets? Are the asset owners capable of being present for a discussion? So starting with the asset owners is always where we start. If the asset owners are capable of engaging and that they're healthy and well, and they're not gone beyond the stage where they're not able to communicate on their own behalf. So starting with the asset owners, their primary needs going forward. What do they need security-wise for themselves? If there are 2 they have each other going forward. If there's just one person, their needs going forward, that they cannot be left feeling impoverished or vulnerable. So that is essential going forward. And that's a conversation with family members. And once that essential conversation is held, then looking at the assets and if it's an active and viable farm, who within the family perhaps would like to continue farming, maybe more than one. And those softer skills in talking, those conversations with family members, if that can be addressed and if a plan is there before the advisor is brought in, because then we can put the figures and the tax figures and all of the best way forward. But the softer conversation is a conversation for the family. And sometimes the advisors, they know the family very well from an advisory perspective, but the softer emotional side of it, they don't wish by and large to get involved in that side of it. So keeping that separate from the pure advisory guidance role, which advisors always give to all of their clients. So that's where we facilitate those more difficult conversations. And some of the better cases are where we've had an initial conversation or two indeed with the family, and then the advisor sits in and we collaboratively work together around the table, listening to what the advisor's input would be, especially from a tax point of view, and the planning that's required as it advances going forward.
Clare, in the situation you highlighted, and I think probably the first focus of most people wanting to hand over to the next generation is to keep things fair. But where you have multiple children that want to farm, or where you have some children that don't want to farm, getting that balance between trying to keep it fair and keep what the next person could be taking on viable. How do you manage in those situations?
With a lot of experience, it helps, I'll be honest, because some farms are substantially large and need a few labour units. And some they may be large, but there may not be a very viable income from it because of the way it's being worked or the way a legacy may have been left negatively from a previous generation. There may be financial burdens still attached to land. So there's no one size fits all in this conversation. But listening with respect, parents don't owe anything to their children once they've had an education and they're effectively looked after education-wise and they're moved into adulthood. They don't actually owe anything to their children. So it's the gift of the parents if they wish to give anything to the next generation. They cannot disinherit. You cannot disinherit your spouse or your partner, but you're not legally obliged to give anything to your children. So maintaining family harmony when it's a gift really parents are giving to their children, but it has to be planned if there are substantial assets to be transferred. But equally, if there's one viable farm and there perhaps are two family members who could work it. So that's where the collaboration comes in and the options of different sorts of partnerships. And there are now more opportunities in shared farming arrangements, both on and off farm and working with another farmer. So that is really, they're the really interesting cases because there's a willingness to go forward and embrace farming by a few family members. And they're the really positive conversations because they've done their research by and large and they're bringing more options to the table to find solutions and to see a vision where they do see a vision for the future in agriculture. They're the really, really interesting cases. It's where there's perhaps nobody willing to work like the previous generation, but they might like to do things differently. So that requires maybe a change of mindset, going from one enterprise to another and looking at things slightly differently.
Thanks, Clare. And I suppose from your experience working with Teagasc and the different succession clinics that you've participated in across the country, can you share some of the best practices or examples where mediation truly facilitated a smoother transition?
Well, there was one case comes to mind, actually, Catherine, and it was during COVID time. So it was all done online. We weren't able to have the clinics during that time. I had met with the parents just prior to COVID, and they said, our sons and daughters, they're all over the world. And there was a large enough family of them all actively farming. And I met them via Zoom at various hours of the day and evening. And we worked through a plan, and they, in collaboration with their advisor and tax planner and their accountant, they had land in 3 different counties. And I was at one of the clinics, perhaps in 2003, and I saw a line of men, a row of men sitting in front of me, and I was going, holy gosh, where will I start with this And they each came together in unison, not just one. And I couldn't understand why these 5 men were coming together. It's like Dad's army. And they came up to say thank you. And I didn't recognize them because I'd actually never met them in person. And they had followed the process of talking and listening to each other. It was probably the more difficult case because it was all done online, but there was a willingness. They had all gone abroad at different phases and different stages of their lives to get experience. They had worked in from combines to silage to shearing sheep to milking cows in different countries around the world. And they had a vision of what they wanted to do in Ireland to drive on the business that was at home. It was a complex business, few enterprises, but they all wanted the best outcome for their parents who were moving on in years and for themselves to work. So that was probably one of the bigger enterprises that really did work well. And some of this, I won't say smaller because it's all relative, but some family farms where there might be, and one in particular comes to mind now, there's 40 cows and it's a beautifully managed farm. And I met them actually in their own home and it's pristine, and their succession plan changed due to family circumstances. They thought it was going to their eldest son and he's not in Ireland. And when they looked at the picture, they have a daughter who was delighted to be heard and to be seen, that she actually is the person who would love to continue her off-farm job, but she'd manage the cows and she'd manage that as a dairy farm. Going forward at the moment, it may change, but that was one of the nicer ones that was facilitated. And they perhaps would not have come up with the same outcome if they hadn't been able to look at the bigger picture. And again, no, they have a very good advisor. And the advisor was very supportive of whatever gender wanted to milk the cows, made no difference. But there was somebody so willing to take on that mantle in that farm.
Most definitely, Clare. It's great to see how it facilitated a smoother transition in both scenarios. What would you see as the common pitfalls that lead to breakdowns in collaborative arrangements, and how families guard against them?
If there is a pebble in your shoe, take out the pebble at the beginning. Don't wait until it gets worse. If something isn't right, when you're teasing out a partnership or an arrangement going forward, don't ignore the small things which annoy you. So if there's something wrong, address it. So when you have a meeting, whether it is Monday morning, a good time to have a meeting is Monday morning after the morning's work, after breakfast, or have breakfast together. Tease things out. What's the plan for the week? What went well last week? Acknowledge what was done well. So acknowledging each other, because bigger problems begin as small problems. So it's addressing the smaller challenges as they arise and don't ignore them. And most people want to see progress. Most people want things to continue. There can be challenges when people wait too long and the energy is gone from one generation and they're beginning to slow down to the extent that they don't have the energy to embrace a vision and the youth and the energy that's coming forward, perhaps in a collaboration type of an arrangement. So there is a time, there's an optimal time in one's life to embrace change and to embrace letting go of the reins. But as I say, if you let go of the horse, you're handing over the horse, hand over the reins as well. By all means, keep an interest and stay involved in whatever level you need to and you want to, because you have the expertise and that's needed as well. But not to stay fully in control if you expect somebody else to take over from you.
James, just to bring you back in for a moment, in terms of financial supports or tax incentives, what is currently available for young farmers?
Thanks, Ciaran. A fine big question. So there's 3 taxes. Capital gains tax on the giver. The main relief used there is retirement relief, and for the average farm, it tends to reduce the tax on the giver to 0. Then you've got 2 taxes on the person receiving the farm. So the first one that I'll talk about is stamp duty. So that's if you claim young trained farmer stamp duty relief. So that's where the green cert comes in. So if the farm is transferred before age 35 and they have their education right, the stamp duty reduces to 0. In some cases where people are gone beyond 35 with receiving the farm from a relative, they can claim consanguinity relief. And that relief isn't quite 0. It's 1% at the moment. And it can change. But 1% is not a huge price, and sometimes, it's the right thing to do to pay a small amount of tax. But the main tax that causes the most headaches is called capital acquisitions tax. And there's a parent-to-child threshold of 400,000, but as you know, the average farm is worth well more than that, probably closer to the million mark. So the relief that the young person would be hoping to claim is called agricultural relief. And if you qualify for agricultural relief, the tax gets reduced to zero. But there are tests that you must pass in order to qualify. And one of them is that after the transaction, more than 80% of your assets must be deemed agricultural. So sometimes if the child receiving the gift has a house in town or have other assets, it can be tricky. So that's the main tax that causes the most headache. So that's where you need your valuations, and you need to sit down with an accountant, because once the asset is given across, you have to make your tax return, and you can't give it back to avoid the tax. So you need to do your sums before you actually sign on the dotted line. So that's why I was saying earlier that, you know, you do your sums, you do your calculations first of all before you go to the solicitor's office. So that's a quick summary, Ciaran. And if people want to see more detail, we had a webinar on last Tuesday night where we go into more detail, and there's stuff on the website that people can refer to as well.
Definitely. We'll put the link to that webinar in the show notes. Look, I take your point. It's important to have them conversations and get that advice at an early stage. James, like, just in terms of the different collaborative farmer models, like share farming or farm partnerships, and you've touched on some of this, but how can they both benefit generations financially and from an operational point of view in the running of that farm?
Well, let's say registered farm partnership give a legal, it's a legal structure. So if there's 2 parties involved or 3 parties or 7 parties, I came across a case with 7 parties in it a number of years ago where there was parents and children and daughters-in-law involved. So they're in a legal structure. So the day you set it up is the day you dissolve it. So everything is agreed at the start. So it's very easy to dissolve should relationships break down in the future, or should a party want to excregate themselves. Like sometimes parents want to just completely retire and do a full handover. So, you know, partnerships are often adjusted where parents decide to step away and it's fully over to the children. But we see registered farm partnerships as a great stepping stone on a journey, because people are living longer. And, you know, especially if there's a short generation gap, that you've got parents in their mid-50s and there's kids are finished their college education and ready to start farming, you know, it gives a legal structure to allow people to farm together. So that's extended then, you know, that neighbours can join up. So we had a farm walk last week of a farmer from Mullingar in partnership with a young person from Cavan, where they joined resources. So they each own half the herd. One provides the land, the other provides the labour, and they work together and split the profits. So that's neighbours, you know, and trying to, I suppose, get the conversation right. You know, there was an advert put into the papers, and the landowner interviewed, I think, 8 people before he found a person that he felt was the best fit to work with him and his farm to do a deal. And they're 4 years in now, and, you know, they've decided to do it for 10 years and see how it goes. But the chances are it will go beyond that, because things are working well. But there aren't too many of those in the country. Share farming, you mentioned, Ciaran, is another one. And that's where, you know, there's 2 businesses running on the one farm. They're more predominantly in tillage areas, where a landowner will hire will have a deal done with the local contractor where they're in a share farming arrangement. So the landowner might buy seeds and spray, and, you know, they split the profit from the grain, and, you know, the person that's doing the work with the fancy machinery, you know, he's out doing the work, but they're splitting the sales check when they deliver the grain to the co-op at the end of the day. There are some share farm arrangements starting in dairy farming. There aren't as many, but it's the same idea. So you've got a landowner and you've got a person that's coming in to do the labour. So based on what each party is putting into the deal, you know, they're both running their own business, and based on their business, they're generating a profit and they're paying their own separate taxes. So it's one farm and it's 2 businesses. Contract rearing is another kind of collaborative arrangement where, you know, a farmer is offloading his young stock to get somebody else to rear them, and when they turn into adults, they're brought back again. And land leasing is another one. It's collaborative in that, you're doing a deal with somebody to farm your land, and everything is written down in the lease as to what they're not allowed to do and what they are to do. And, so there's a fee paid across. So that's collaborative in a way as well. So there's a number of different models, and some people are involved in 2 and 3 different types, even on the same piece of land. Because if you have a fragmented farm, like we have lots of them in Ireland, you might do contract rearing on one block, you might be in a registered farm partnership in another block, and a far away block might be leased to another party. So you can combine the different options. So there's lots of options for people that are not sure where to go. So good start is to go talk to their advisor, maybe turn up to some of our clinics, talk to Clare, talk to ourselves, and work on from there. But it's about early engagement, because if you engage early, it means that you can formulate a plan, and it means that if there are taxes that need to be avoided or managed, that in time before, because the last thing you want is, where there was no engagement and a farm is transferred by will, but some of that farm then has to be sold, to clear a tax debt, or that, the fair deal scheme sometimes comes in where some of the farm has to be sold to clear the debt that's created by the fair deal scheme.
And look, and certainly the landscape has changed a lot, James, but like from what you've discussed there, there's a lot of opportunities out there for farmers. One other aspect probably we need to consider is, and we often look at this from a young farmer getting involved, but we also need to consider farmers retiring out of it and having a reliable income strategy. I suppose in that context, James, how does the pension system in Ireland stack up, and maybe what challenges are there for Irish farmers, both looking at state and a private pension, and how would that affect some of the succession decisions on the farm?
Where the business has been, where you have a decent sized farm and there's tax being paid, there's a contributory pension. But where the farm is small and there wasn't tax being paid because the income was so small, like we have lots of farmers that, the check in the post is the income and some of that is spent farming. There might not be a contributory pension, so they're relying on the state pension, so there's less there. So when there's less there, that mightn't be enough. So they tend to continue farming. So the farm transfer might be delayed because of that. But I think it's about sitting down with an advisor and working out a plan, because, if you're physically less able to do farming, and maybe it's about, leasing because of the situation with nitrates, so many people are crying out for land, so the price has gone up. So leasing might be a good option for those people. And you could go working, possibly, doing some of the less physical work for the person that leases the farm. So you could have lease income, you could be checking animals for that person, and you might have your pension. So it's about sitting down with a financial advisor to work out, what is right for you. And it's not just about money. Sometimes it's about your mental health. Lots of farmers say, no, I'll be found turned up with my wellies on in the field. That's the way I want to go out. And, that's fair if people want to do that. But, I suppose it's about making the family aware, how you want to do it. And so you can't just tell people to hand over the land. It's their decision when they're good and ready to hand it over. And when it's handed over, you can't take it back. So whoever you give it to, you have to be happy in your own head that whatever they do with it, you're happy with those facts. So if it's gambled or it's spent traveling the world or whatever, you have to be happy when you sign on the dotted line that you're okay with that. So, mental health is also part of this journey as well. And, Clare would go into that a lot when she's doing her mediation work.
Finally, James, you mentioned there are a number of Transform the Family Farm clinics coming up across the country in the next number of weeks. What can farmers expect to see and learn at these clinics?
Well, I suppose when somebody comes into the hotel room, you'll be in the ballroom, and we will have lots of professionals around. So Clare will be there as a mediator. We'll have accountants, solicitors, ourselves in Teagasc, and there's so many different elements even to Teagasc. One person's farm retirement plan could be around planting some forestry for the tax-free income. So we'll have foresters, we'll have schemes people. Anything that you think Teagasc is involved in, there'll be an expert there in relation to that, particularly around farm transfer. If you are unfortunate enough to be diagnosed with a terminal illness, Embrace Farm will be on hand to help support you, get through that. Citizens information will also be on hand. Some people are worried about the Fair Deal scheme and the 5-year look back. So if you have a pension question or a question about Fair Deal or any taxation questions, Citizens Information Service are an excellent service that fulfill that role for us at the clinics. So there's lots of professionals. It's when you're in a hotel room, if one professional refers you to another, you just have to walk across the room. We'll tee up the audience with, appropriate questions that they can ask the different professionals. And we'll also present some case studies of families that have gone through farm succession, and we'll show them how the tax calculations were done for the different members of the families. And, we also have the Department of Agriculture, who have the Registered Farm Partnership Unit, and you can talk to them about farm partnerships. And usually at these clinics, the busiest people are Clare on the mediation side and my colleague Ruth Fennell on the collaborative farming, so registered farm partnerships type questions. So they'll all be in attendance at these events. And we're starting in Gart on the 30th of September. Then we move to Roscommon Town the 1st of October. Then we're down to Cahir on the 7th. The Setu Arena in Waterford on the 8th. We're in Dunmanway in the Parkway Hotel on the 9th. And we finish in the Hillgrove Hotel in Monaghan on the 14th of October. So if you miss one, you can travel to the other. And sometimes we find that people don't go to the one beside them because they want to go to one far away where they're not known to have their chat. And that's fine too. And sometimes people, they know what they want, but they just want to get a second opinion. And it's a free event and all are welcome. So log on to the website under events and you can book in there. And if you're not very handy on the smartphone to book in, you can ring the local office and the admin staff will book you in over the phone.
That's great, James. Thanks very much. And the details you mentioned there of the upcoming events, they'll be included in the podcast notes.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. We'll have included links in the show notes to both that webinar where you can find out more information about upcoming meetings that James has discussed. That's it for me for Update Summer Sheep Programme. Keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Ciaran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.